The replica wall at Sheriffmuir, just above Dunblane, is a model of Hitler's Atlantic Wall, which stretched along the coast all the way from Norway down to Spain. This was the main line of defence against amphibious invasion, and this is what the Allies were planning, the Americans, the Canadians, the British. And given the ambition involved in that project, training was essential to get all of these men, all of this equipment from the sea onto the land through these defences was going to be a very tricky operation indeed. And so it required really intensive training, and that was the main function of this replica. The structure you see behind you was built in late 1943 and was used there from there on for D-Day training. And as you've been told, as you've already heard, this is a type of training called dry shod training. You might think, why have we got a coastal defence up on a moorland miles away from the nearest sea? Well, the point is, it's in an isolated location. And what amazes me about this structure is, it's so obvious, but nobody knows it's here.
This type of seawall was used on Omaha Beach to block the 5 valleys that led off, the 5 draws as they call them in Saving Private Ryan. On the British beaches it tended to be the normal seawall was incorporated into the defences.
Well, I haven't been around Dunblane all that much,
Okay.
in that I lived on Sheriffmuir, but at the Blackford end of Sheriffmuir, where we came in 1936. As far as the Atlantic Wall goes, my viewing of that was if we were going to Stirling, across the road past where they were doing the work, and you could see all the activity and the construction going on, but you weren't encouraged to stop and look at it. And of course nobody took any photographs because you didn't have any film to take photographs with in these days. I don't know if any exist anywhere at all, but it was just seeing it from a distance as you went past.
The main wall at Sheriffmuir is about 3 metres high, 3 metres thick. It stretches for about 86 metres, so it's just a small length, a representative length of one of the forms of defence. And if you look at it today, it's absolutely pockmarked with explosive impacts and charges that have been drilled into it. And at one point there's a huge hole in it where a tank would drive through. What you're looking at is concrete, high and thick, but also reinforced with iron rods. So it's steel reinforced concrete. But if you look at it, you can see the construction techniques used. You can see on the outside there's the convoluted pattern on the concrete where they've used corrugated iron basically to create a mould. So they built a mould and then put these rods in, these iron rods inside the mould, and then poured the concrete. And you can see individual lumps of concrete as they've been poured in. You can see part of that evidence at Sheriffmuir. There are smaller holes blown into it, but at one point, about 2/3 of the way up, there's a huge gap in it. And the debris that's been blown back from the wall stretches for about 40 metres behind it. And it looks very much as though they've used a device called a double onion, which is essentially a shaped charge. It looks like a pallet that a forklift truck would pick up, but it's packed full of explosives. And basically they had a tank that was specially adapted to roll up to the wall, to plant this thing against it, and then move away, rolling out a cable, and then electronically blowing this charge. And this has created this massive void with the debris blown backwards. And the idea is that that would be wide enough to get a tank through. However, if you look at the remains up there today, it's hard to envisage how they would have got a tank through that hole, because it's very ragged. There are big chunks of concrete with these reinforcing rods poking through. And I would challenge any tank driver to actually get a tank through there. So even though they'd worked out how to blow a hole in it, it wasn't necessarily suitable for driving a tank through.
Well, I mean, I think it's very significant because obviously for the sacrifice that was made, and also, you know, we like to support anything to do with the 1940s. From our group, we educate and do outreach for schools, and also looking at setting up a museum in Glasgow. And anything else that we can do to sort of highlight the sacrifices, the type of equipment, and the sort of things and vehicles, the weapons, the uniforms, etc. that was used, obviously, 70 years ago.
one gentleman that's confusing them.
One other thing was when the shelling started, the shelling was from over on the north side, shelling using the Atlantic Wall as a target. And the authorities were supposed to tell the farmers that there was going to be shelling on Tuesday or Thursday or whatever day it was, to give the farmers a chance to clear the sheep. Okay. But on occasions they didn't. And some days the firing would just start out without any prior warning. And if the shepherd was out on the hill, then he had to do a quick runner to get himself out of the danger area. And this resulted in the demise, of course, of quite a number of sheep.
Part of the project has been searching out documentary sources, looking for written evidence, pictorial evidence of what was going on. Not easy, obviously, given it was essentially a secret operation, but there are documents in place, and Janice and I spent some time down at the National Archives at Kew in London, going through the minutes and the archives of the Anti-Concrete Committee. And there's information in there about the construction and use of the wall replica at Dunblane. We've put out a public appeal to people that may have been involved or had relatives that were involved. So we've still got stories coming through there. We've got local veterans who have memories. That part of the project is still very much ongoing. And I think at the end of the day, when we combine that with our virtual record, with our laser scan surveys, I think we're going to have a very important record of what happened at Dunblane and these other places.
But in 1993, I was contacted by someone from the library in Dunblane. They had had a contact from a Bill Hudson in Tyne-and-Weir, who was one of the original engineers who was involved in building the Atlantic Wall. And he didn't know where it was. He suspected it was Dunblane. As it turned out, he told me that they had been brought out and in every day. I don't know where the depot was, but in covered wagons, so they couldn't see where they were building this, and it was kept secret. They weren't told, and of course the road signs had all been removed. So they were brought in anonymously, but he had presumably looked through a flap in the canvas somewhere and discovered that Dunblane was a name that was relevant to the operation.
After talking to Janice Ainsley at the museum for a while, we realised that on our own doorstep we had this amazing structure from World War II that very few people know about. And again, it's that secret thing, it's still in an isolated location. And given that the 70th anniversary of D-Day was approaching, it seemed a no-brainer really to do something about that. And so we looked at how we could not only record our own monuments, but also bring in the various other examples of Atlantic walls surviving elsewhere, particularly down south. We engaged a contractor which specialises in laser scanning, which was the technique we used to basically computer model in high detail these structures. And we're now well advanced in that programme. In fact, we've found a new example that we didn't know about previously. So we've now got what we think are 5 examples of stretches of Atlantic wall that we used, some of which are on the coast, some like Sheriffmuir inland.
I think it was totally forgotten. I don't think anyone really knew or cared from the end of the war, because that was it. It was past. We had won the war, as it were, and therefore what had gone before was just ignored. And I don't think really that much had happened until almost the turn of the century. And the last 10 or 15 years there has been much more interest. Now you get people stopping and wondering what it is, or they've maybe got some information as to what might be there, and they go and look for it and so forth. But in between, I don't think there was any real interest in it at all. It had obviously been, it was all the surrounding area, the barbed wire was all taken down, the barbed wire supports were all taken down, and they were all stuffed into that Tobruk bunker that's on site. It was filled, literally filled with all that. It's still in there. It's now rusty dust down on the ground level, possibly. But that was where all the fencing and everything went, and nobody really cared or looked at it afterwards.
The Heritage Lottery funding was key. We couldn't have done anything near as ambitious as we've achieved without it, because what we wanted to do was use state-of-the-art technology to create very detailed virtual models of these sites. And this laser scanning technology I've used before on various conflict archaeology projects. And basically what you do is you fire millions of laser points at solid objects, and that gets transferred into a model which you can then render and get all of the detail of the actuality. And the sort of stuff it allows us in this instance is to record in finite detail all of the pockmarks and all of the impacts and damage on these concrete structures. And it's the first time that's been done. D-Day is a key point in our history, so it's vital that we remember it, and I can't think of a better way to do that than to secure the future of these remains.